We now invite Mr. Aritra Sarkhel, Director, Public Policy, WazirX, Ms. Farah Lalani, former Community Lead, Global Coalition for Digital Safety, World Economic Forum, Ms. Tanvi Ratna, Founder and CEO, Policy 4.0, and Mr. Anirudh Rastogi, Founder and Managing Partner, Ikigai Law, for moderating the session entitled Decentra Apps, Organizations, Finance, Economy, and Now Land. Over to you, Anirudh.
Thank you, Saurabh, and thanks everyone on the panel. It's lovely to have you here. Before I kind of come down to kind of discussing governance and legal challenges, which really is the topic here, I think it'd be lovely to spend a little time just discussing what lies here at the intersection of the metaverse and Web 3.0 as we know today, and as and what we see emerging out of it, right? And let's just spend some time understanding what are the kind of emerging business models, the emerging kind of revenue models, etc., before we start thinking of how to regulate, how to govern, and the kind of challenges we'll face from a legal and policy perspective. So, well, I mean, let's dive in. I think lovely panel, three different viewpoints. Tanvi, you've spent a fair bit of time talking about regulation and governance generally, or on issues range across blockchain, crypto, Web 3.0, CBDCs, whatnot. Aritra, you of course in the center of all action with representing public policy for WazirX. Clearly, lots been going on, for as long as I remember. Farah, fantastic to have you because you represent Coalition for Digital Safety, and would be lovely to hear the kind of safety, security concerns that in this evolving world of metaverse powered by Web 3.0. I think it would be fantastic to have your perspectives on that as well. So, all right. So before we before going any further, I would just want to say that, well, what really is the metaverse is something quite fuzzy, something that everybody, different people. You ask 10 people, they'll give you 10 different answers. So, what does the panel think, right? I mean, what do you? What is your perspective? How would you define the metaverse? Maybe just quick, brief answers to begin with. Aritra?
All right, I have to be very careful in what I say because right now everybody's fighting for what is the definition of all these things in every part of the world, in every government. But honestly, see, metaverse is like what social media used to be like in the beginning, right? It's like successor to the mobile internet. Metaverse is basically, I would say, in the current form, absolutely in the current form. When I say current form, in the current businesses and the tech which is around in the world, it's basically a bunch of, say, virtual worlds sitting beyond the real world, which is, I would say, fractured between independent entities. Now, there are connections in the real world, the roads, the helicopters, your relationships with other human beings, airplanes, right? But those connections are subject to, say, tolls and gatekeepers, in contrast to the interoperability and the freedom of the metaverse. That's the way I put it. But stuff that empowers the metaverse, the tech and all of that, they existed for the longest time. It's only now because of better internet infrastructure and things like ownership of digital assets, which has happened because of the blockchain. Things like metaverses again come back to the fore, but we still have a long way to go. That's how I'll put it. What's happening now?
Okay, so you equate it to an evolved social media without the kind of the disconnect that comes from a centralized kind of
Oh yeah. Think of it like a pre-Napster world. What happened before Napster, right? What happened before Facebook? Those kind of social media. I know that makes me sound very old here, but we're in that phase of metaverse right now. It'll happen.
I like that. I like that. Tanvi?
Yeah, in terms of definition, I think I would agree with Aritra that there's a lot of dispute on it. I think the simplest way to think about it is a series of interconnected virtual worlds, right, where you're doing a variety of activity. Um, and yeah, I think there are some finer points to it, especially when you think of this Web 2 approach to metaverse versus Web 3. But we can talk about that later in the discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Farah, is there something you? How do you look at the metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Aritra and Tanvi have said. I just think in terms of the experience that it's going to enable, being persistent, being immersive, I think is just going to revolutionize kind of how we interact and what our presence means online. And so I think it's a really exciting time to be having this discussion. So I'm just agreeing with everything that's already been said.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I think, and Aritra, it's interesting when you say that the metaverse is still in its kind of early days of evolution. But I remember growing up, there used to be, and I'm talking really like, maybe 20 years back or so, 25 years back, there used to be this magazine for teenagers called The Target. And they used to, I still remember they carried a chapter which seemed extremely futuristic for the time, and I mean, probably still is, about this concept called virtual reality, right? Back in the day. And they were talking about real prototypes of, being used by the U.S. military. No surprises, the U.S. military was actually at the absolute forefront of, the kind of developments we've seen in virtual reality, and they were using it for training, simulation, whatnot. And there was this article about how this will extend eventually, like everything else, into into kind of used by people like you and I, right, the retail consumer. And what has really happened, right, in the last 20-25 years with that technology that was being used in a silo by the US military. I think one, it has become accessible primarily because, well, the internet has become more accessible. The infrastructural developments, and it's become cheap now. I can buy an Oculus, and it doesn't cost a bomb, and plug in, etc. Right. But what is also happening is that it's not just virtual reality and augmented reality. There are multiple other technological developments that are happening all at the same time, which are changing the way virtual reality can be thought of and deployed, right? And whether it's at the infrastructure level, whether it is at network speeds, whether it is the kind of content that we have, and then Web 3.0, right? And all of these developments coming together, I think, is now giving you a lot more, opening up a lot more possibility. So that's the next question that I want to ask you, which is that, one, how is Web 2.0 being built out, or sorry, the metaverse being built out on Web 2.0 going to be different from the metaverse that will now be built out on Web 3.0? And Tanvi, you kind of pointed to that earlier in the conversation. So would you like to take that?
Sorry, I was moving. Yeah, so I think the Web 2 versus Web 3 debate is where I think this hazy kind of concept starts taking focus, right? Because if you think about the metaverse, I think where it actually makes sense right now, and this is also disputed, but I think it makes most sense at the moment for enterprises, right? And you might see the first sort of real applications of metaverse really taking off there. And there you're looking at a combination of like a enterprise stack, and you're looking at VR, AR, and all these things sort of working together, right? I mean, the first place that it really seems to be appealing as a use case is virtual meeting places and things like that. So I think there, if you look at it closely, and there's some great thinkers who've written about this, like Ben Thompson, who I think is absolutely brilliant as a tech analyst. I mean, he wrote in detail about it, about how if you look at adoption for this idea of a metaverse, and if we look at enterprises as the first place that goes to there, someone like a Web 2 player like a Microsoft has just a lot of advantages, right? Because it has a complete enterprise SaaS stack. It has everything from the hardware, which is your desktop, to your applications, your teams, your cloud, your Azure, all of that. And then they just enable these competencies, right? So it could be that there they have like a very big advantage, right? So I don't think we can fully write off the Web 2 players, because when we look at all these things, I think Web 3 has a lot of advantages here, right? Like, I mean, this very clearly, if you look at NFT gaming and where we're going with that whole ecosystem with DAOs and everything, like we are the metaverse, right? Like, Web3 is the metaverse. But then when you look at those challenges of interoperability, the changing assets and everything, I mean, there are a lot of advances that we made, but is it still as seamless as the Web2 space? Like, we don't know, right? So I think, I don't really have, can't settle this debate. I think it's raging like all over Silicon Valley, all over India. Mr. Neil Carney made all these comments right now on Web3. And I think, I would just say that, we can't really write off either side, right?
That's a fair point. We can't write off either side. So I'll take that away from your intervention. Aritra, what are just taking this forward? What are the kind of emerging business models that we see, lying on this intersection of Web3 and the metaverse, right? So what lies at this intersection? Whether in terms of business ideas, whether in terms of revenue models, other activity.
Anirudh, is that for me? Because I think I lost you guys in the last.
It is.
All right, business models. Okay, listen, I'm not going to guarantee any fascinating business models where people can build their businesses right now and then go for funds this Sunday, right, to some VC. Here's the thing. See, Web3 is a lot of things. And metaverse can exist even without, if you don't have a AR or VR headset, first of all. And also metaverse is not about one company which renamed themselves Meta in the last 3 months. Metaverse is a lot beyond that, first of all. But see, Web3 is a lot of things. I mean, I honestly think, because see, we've been building products in this space for quite a bit now. I don't think people generally have a definition on what Web3 is. Honestly, why I'm telling this to you, because it's evolving massively. Even today, we had, we had two pitches for couple of companies who were doing something on the medical field on Web3. I was like, wow, how does this happen? I had no clue that even this kind of a product can be built. Right now, having said that, Web3 is something that is controlled by users and powered by tokens. This is very important to understand, right? It's about how much value these users give back into the ecosystem through tokens, through time, through code, through mining. Web3 is sort of a decentralized token-led web, right? It ain't and also what Tanvi also said, and I completely agree. I mean, I know we keep talking about this on various platforms. This is the new big thing. This is the newest thing in the world, and all of that. See, it is not going to completely overnight diminish and evaporate what's already there in Web 2 and Web 1, but however and whichever way you want to define, right? It's not going to replace anything currently. Like, I'll give you an example why I'm saying that, right? Like, I'll give you an example. You guys remember eBay and Craigslist, right? They still exist. They have not gone away anywhere, but they still have customers. Hello, but there's the debate of Web 1.2.3. So what happens? Look at eBay and Craigslist. Like, Airbnb came out of Craigslist. Airbnb, Uber, they were all, I remember, they were like subsections in the Craigslist website, right? So the Web3 is doing the same by creating something what people like I'm working on multiple projects where we're creating dApps, decentralized applications. Now, abhi aisa nahi hai ki decentralized applications by this next coming Monday will completely replace the Play Store and the iStore. It won't happen. You need users, boss. You want to run a legitimate business, you need users. When did Facebook really become big? It took some time. It had to go to a threshold number of users, right? That being said, I honestly don't want to predict and cannot necessarily predict where those apps are going to be. But having said that, blockchain, you need to understand, for those of you hearing this for the first time, or even if you've just heard the thing blockchain on some BuzzFeed article and all of that, see, blockchain is the precursor to metaverse. VR and AR, when VR and AR really takes off, which I honestly don't believe has still happened, it has to be global. It has to be permissionless, just like an internet is. It has to be censorship free, rather than fit into what your local bosses in India or somewhere else think. It's not going to be owned by one person. This is very important, right? And in terms of the business model, I can tell you some of the business model purely based on my interaction with folks who are building in Asia and Africa. I'll give you examples from there and a couple of examples from Europe. Now, the telecom companies, like your Airtels and the Vodafones of the world, those kind of companies, right? The telecom companies in every country, they can actually play a huge role in metaverse and Web3, not just providing your 5G and 4G infrastructure, but also act as validator nodes. They can actually provide validator service for crypto companies as a service. That's a huge thing that they can develop. The other thing is The mobile phones that you have, we a lot of crypto and blockchain and metaverse that happens is still on a, you need a good machine. When I say a good machine, you need a really powerful machine to run these things. The mobile phone till still hasn't played a massive role in metaverse per se right now, the application that you see in the market right now, right? So mobile phones will have to play a very important role in acting as the middle player. So applications on the mobile phone, then telecom companies, as I told you, then digital avatar. There's so many brands who are working on it right now. They've hired people to work on it. Digital avatar launches for brands. That's one. Travel is a huge thing again. Then social reputation business companies can be built on metaverse. The other thing that I think Tanvi alluded to, and I think I do completely agree, because I've heard at least 5 to 6 IT services heads of IT services companies of India alluding me and talking about, boss, how can we build something on this. Enterprises can have digital twins of their autonomous organizations to manage, control analog processes. That can happen. Like, say if you have a traditional IT services company, they can build a metaverse version of the same thing, right? So you'll have a digital twin on the metaverse, and a lot of other functions of the same 20-year-old IT company can have on the metaverse. Then the other thing is smart contracts. This is a particular European company in Germany who's doing that. Basically what they're doing is, if I'm not wrong, let me frame this. Yes. So what they're doing is basically they're creating insurance contracts for farmers across the Eurozone through a virtual ecosystem, right? Now, I remember him telling me, like, these smart contracts, I mean, obviously on blockchain networks, together with, decentralized oracles like Chainlink and all, it is helping them overcome your transparency challenges, right? The last is, honestly, which I think will make a huge impact, and if anybody is not looking at it, it's going to completely again, I don't want to be I don't want to sound like an idiot after 10 years if this is recorded somewhere, but it will redo the advertising industry. At least the way digital advertising currently works on the internet layer, that part will be redone on the metaverse through brands and through advertising contracts. That part will be redone. So this is the way I look at it.
Okay, fascinating. Aritra, so I'm going to kindly just slightly change gears and bring in Farah here, and talk about how regulation needs to change and adapt to enable this intersection of the metaverse and Web3 that Aritra just articulated for us. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, a lot of the technologies and sort of use cases that Aritra and Tanvi have been talking about, those are exactly the sorts of technologies and use cases that haven't really been well regulated, right? So whether it's the use of AI, cryptocurrencies for payment, or say the collection of, for example, movement data through VR headsets, none of this has really been well thought of when it comes to sort of regulation, both self-governance and sort of government regulation. So I think there's a few areas that kind of need to be better addressed. One, on the content regulation side. So when we look at kind of the web today, and the focus primarily, say, on, removing harmful content, whether it's text, images, and videos, that will need to move more to sort of behavioral, looking at behaviors and kind of how those need to be governed and regulated in the future, given that, for one, how we actually respond to things in an immersive environment, the threat that we perceive from sort of behaviors and risks is going to be fundamentally different. So I think that's sort of one area. Then from a payments perspective, that's a whole other area, right? So you see what's happening in Canada today. I'm Canadian, so it's kind of hitting close to home. But the Prime Minister Trudeau just invoked the Emergency Act, and it's actually mandating that crowdfunding platforms and payment services, including crypto, must register and actually tell the government what sorts of transactions are happening, and kind of facing similar regulations to banks. And so that's part of the trying to bring crowdfunding platforms and these newer payment service providers, trying to capture those under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act, so that these illegal blockades by the truckers are not being financed. Whether that will remain after the Emergency Act is sort of like not not in place anymore is yet to be seen. But I think a lot of the, financial regulations around payment and how that's going to apply, and in what sense, especially when it comes to preventing crime and terrorism, is another area that I think will be very important to cover. And then I think lastly, data regulation, right? So what data is collected, how it's used. Texas just sued Meta for the collection of the facial recognition data. And I think with what we're going to see in the metaverse in terms of one of the key technologies of AR and VR and how biometric data is collected, that's going to be super important in terms of how that's regulated, because it can have massive implications for privacy and human rights.
But Farah and Tanvi, this is probably both for both of you. That does typically the existing set of regulations that we have, right? Do you think they're well suited to kind of address the emerging challenges from or do you think we need specialized laws to address some of these challenges, whether it's privacy, whether it's digital crimes, etc.
Is
Either
that
of you.
for me?
Either of you can go.
Yeah, I do think that
was. Yeah, sorry. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I gave. Was it for me? I mean,
We'll bring you in, Aritra, and then we'll go back to Farah and then to Tanvi. I think all of you jumping to answer this one, and I'm glad that's the way I would like this to go on. Yeah. Aritra, over to you.
hey, okay, okay. Let me choose my words carefully on this. Yeah, in terms of regulations, for sure, man. I mean, you can't have something in 1950s work for a technology in 2021, right? Second, we're just focusing on, although we're talking about regulations in India and across the world and stuff like that, we're still focused. A lot of things are still not clear. And I'll break it down very, very, very shortly. One is we're still not clear on the definitions of virtual digital assets, what is crypto, what is NFT, the metaverse, and all are far away. This is not even being discussed at the certain levels of certain our neighboring countries as well as in certain parts of North American governments. But yes, there needs to be a lot of more work done, not only from the industry. When I say industry, I like to point out that a lot of work which has been done in India has only happened through certain member groups, or mostly those member groups have been initially was led by crypto exchanges, right? These crypto exchanges, but the crypto and virtual digital asset exchanges are just one part of the business, right? There's a lot more other players. There are pure play product Web3 companies. There are NFT companies. There are gaming companies, right? So a lot more needs to be done in terms of consultation, I mean, from an advocacy side, from a legal perspective between the industry in India and the government, because otherwise what will happen is, look at what's happened. Look what's happens in India today. People don't launch tokens in India at all. They go outside. They go to Dubai, they register a company over there. They go to Singapore, they go to other parts of Europe to do that. And this is just not to do with one part of the law. There are various departments and various part of the law that you and me abide by in a country like India has to be relooked at. And it might sound a little selfish when I'm saying that, but yes, it is for a large industry. This industry is building the next 5 or 7 years of the internet. And I'm not saying that just because in a position like that I am today with WazirX. It is beyond that. Trust me, it's beyond that. When we talk to 1 month old startups and they ask us, sir, what do I do? Should I register my company in Singapore? Should I? And this is a Web3 guy asking me to so many of them asked us. So those the way we are working right now with the government is to negate those things. Those things should never happen. These companies should be built out of India. The third part is obviously the taxation which came into it. But in terms of the law, you also did mention cybercrime. We work hand in hand with a lot of law enforcement platforms in India, agencies across the world. We share data with agencies. We probably share data with everybody in India and agencies across the world, because that's one thing we wanted to do, because the first thing that you hear in media and everybody, oh, this is crypto, this has to be some sort of money laundering scheme, oh, this has to be some sort of terrorism scheme and all of that. No, man, it's not. It's pure play technology businesses. And Have there been bad actors in the ecosystem? Are there bad actors in this ecosystem? Yes, they are. And for that, we've been working with the government. But the current laws do not encompass the entirety of what crypto and blockchain is from a company perspective, not an exchange perspective. I know, because I come from an exchange, it might seem like, boss, this guy's just talking on selfishly about his exchange games. No, it's about every company. Ask a NFT player in India, where is he registered? Where is he doing his business? What does his CA think of taxation? You'll get those views. And I'm not saying that. Those guys are saying there's 18, 19-year-old kids who are building companies. And why are they going to Dubai? Why are they going to Singapore? That part of the internet should be built out of India. Why did people 10, 15 years ago go to the Silicon Valley? Why are Indian CEOs of Silicon Valley companies? Why aren't those CEOs here of Indian companies? Why we talk about that perspective? So that needs to change. That's why we are doing what we're doing through an industry associations, through individual representations. We're trying to make the government understand that this matters to us. And this is just not about one exchange, because it impacts everybody. A new company otherwise will go out somewhere. You don't want that. So, yes, the laws need to be amended. But again, crypto is just one subject that the government is looking after. They have a country to run. We have had deliberations, and it's a democracy. Let's see what happens in the next few months. So,
But interestingly, Aritra, what you just mentioned about how old laws don't necessarily kind of provide the requisite framework to kind of plug in, say, a token offering or an NFT business or whatever else. This is something which is being debated across the world, right? And to be honest, the one compelling argument is that, well, the principles of law that govern various activities, whether it is offering security to a retail investor, or whether it is a digital crime or a crime on the street or in the metaverse, right? The principles of law don't necessarily change, don't necessarily need to apply differently. They do need to take into account the fact that this is an entirely different beast we are speaking of, and that nuance needs to be there. Now, the problem is that whether it is an old law being applied to a new business activity, or we
yeah,
are trying to start a new law altogether, that nuance is either there or it's not there. If it's not there, even creating a new law, we are going to probably lose the
yeah.
plot, which is happening, right? I mean, so many examples of, I mean, just look at the new tax announcements, for example. Now, Tanvi and Farah, maybe you can come in from a
Can I add a small couple of lines? I'm so sorry.
yeah,
Don't
yeah,
kill me for this. But the nuances are missing, not only here, everywhere. Because
yeah,
we've talked to the very people who are building laws on crypto in probably so far 8 to 9 countries. The nuances are missing in all of them, and some of them are some of them are the most powerful economies in the world. And I'll give you an example in this. I was talking to a DGP of cybercrime somewhere in India, I won't name the state, and the person had person has just one answer. They're like, boss, I don't care what is crypto and blockchain right now. What I care is there is crime happening. What I care is that is theft happening. Oh, now, 10 years ago you were telling me there was internet. Now you're telling me there is blockchain. Boss, you educate me and help me understand how do I capture a criminal on the blockchain. So it's still there. These discussions are still there, and this is a conversation as seven few days ago. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Point taken. These conversations are being had in exactly the same format everywhere else in the world as well. But Farah, just coming from a safety security standpoint, the very same question, right? Do we need new laws to address these concerns, or you think the existing legal frameworks and whichever jurisdiction you want to kind of take as as a case study, but do we need to revisit and redesign our legal frameworks for this?
Yeah, I believe we do. Because if we look at some of the issues, right, with the current, interactions online, it's already becoming more of an issue, whether we're looking at, child sexual abuse images, whether we're looking at hate speech, whether we're looking at, racial abuse. All these problems have grown significantly worse in the last few years, and the metaverse only stands to exacerbate some of these issues based on sort of the way the features, right, that the metaverse, obviously the benefits that it brings, but also the risks. And I really like how Tiffany Wang, she's the chief marketing and strategy officer of Spectrum Labs, sort of a company focused on using AI to weed out online toxicity, puts it, is that Immersiveness increases the impact of any toxicity, persistence increases the velocity of toxicity, and then interoperability makes content moderation very hard because toxicity is industry specific, whether we're looking at dating, gaming, and social platforms. So current regulations don't necessarily address this for a number of reasons. A lot of the things that are, illegal or crimes, when it comes to, for example, sexual abuse, don't translate to the digital world. So, for example, cyber flashing or intimate image abuse, or non consensual sharing of intimate images. A lot of these things don't have legal frameworks in many jurisdictions. Some countries are actually starting to make these things illegal. So Australia's e-safety commissioner has made that non-consensual sharing of intimate images illegal. UK just criminalized cyber flashing, and this was something that Bumble was very passionately sort of advocating for. So basically, there does need to be sort of a translation of what things shouldn't be allowed online, and some of that will be self-governed based on wanting to protect freedom of expression and those sorts of things, but other things do need to be looked at in terms of should doxing or sharing of private information, should cyber flashing, should other things be made illegal online, and both in the Web 2 world but also in the metaverse, because things like issues of groping, racial abuse, those are already we're already seeing signs of that in certain companies' virtual worlds, and even the use of cryptocurrencies to purchase child sexual abuse material, which was in a report made by Act Defense, a safety tech company. So a lot of these things don't have appropriate regulations. They need to be relooked at. They need to be relooked at in the context of the harm that can actually happen in the metaverse because of how it's perceived in an immersive reality.
Sure, fantastic. Tanvi, I would like to bring you in here and discuss how legal frameworks that are developing in India, right, are. It's increasingly clear that we are likely to prescribe some strict norms on, whether it's use of cryptos for payments. We've seen the tax announcements recently. Everything pushing towards greater and greater centralization, right? And how do you think that construct will impact the way metaverse gets built out on Web3?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how much the Indian law will impact the development of Web3. Like, yeah, maybe in our country it will, but I think as far as the I think looking at the Aritra laid out like a variety of issues here. So did Farah, right, in terms of the overall landscape. But I think I agree actually with you, Anirudh, that I don't think the principles of the law change, right? Like, I don't think the ethics are different whether you're in the metaverse or you're in the real world, right? Like, there was a big exploit of code and people's money was stolen. I think generally people agree that that's a bad thing and we don't want to see it, right? And I think the problem is more that we in the policy space, the whole principle of the game is sort of different here, and I think that's why things just don't fit, right? I think the main problem is that there's a lack of acceptance of the fact that this is a decentralized reality, right? There's just a lack of acceptance of that, and I think there's just too much comfort with the traditional approaches, right? You make a depository, you make this, you do that. It worked for all this time, and to be honest, like even in traditional finance, in India, we've not evolved to that degree, in in terms of having all that oversight. But I think just this is like a lot, right? This is a lot to digest, I think, for policymakers. And I think generally their attitude also, as I think Aritra was also saying earlier, it's just that, like, don't try to explain all this to me. Just tell me my job, like tell me what I have to do, right? And I think for most agencies, that's what it is, right? So I think this whole push towards, education, acceptance, and it's not something that you can expect from the line officers. It's like it's just not the ethos, right? And I think once that happens, then you'll see everything change in the way regulators are approaching this, right? I mean, I think there's just the appreciation of that is missing. And I think
Yeah.
once that is sort of drilled in, that
Right.
this is not, you cannot hold people accountable this way, it's not going to work this way, then everything changes.
Yeah. No, completely unconnected. Tanvi, would you buy a piece of virtual land as of today?
I mean, I don't know if I have enough ETH, to to afford them now, but I don't know about the virtual land thing, right? So I mean, I think my smarter friends own VCs and stuff. Like, I hear a lot of divide about how the virtual land thing will play out, right?
Yeah.
I think there's some debate about, well, how scarce is it, and like how much will it actually appreciate? If like, so I don't know. I would say, like, I have not bought virtual land. Like, let's
Sure.
just stick with
I'll
that.
give you an example of exactly this. I was looking at this one venture called Earth 2. I don't know if you've heard of that. Earth 2 is basically, it's, as the name suggests, a map of the planet on, and and basically anybody can buy any piece of parcel of land provided it's available, and build out what you want to on that. And we were looking at it from a legal regulatory kind of feasibility kind of study we were doing, and one of the very basic question was, what if somebody today were to build out an Earth 3 or an Earth 4, right? So what happens to this apparently rare kind of a piece of parcel of land on Earth 2, which is being claimed to be there, but well, not anymore. So Aritra, I mean, what's your take on that, and what do you think is really going to come out of what's the future here in terms of just virtual parcels of land that people are actively trading in, and yeah.
Well, I mean, I do own some of these things, so might be a biased answer coming from my side. But see, this stuff existed many years ago. As I said, I love giving historical example. Minecraft. Minecraft allowed you to build things like this long back, right? Now, Minecraft should be credited with to coming up with metaverse and all of that. They created these things long back, right? But the way I look at it is, okay, let me break this down. One way to think about, since you particularly mentioned about virtual lands and all of that, one way to think about this is like purchasing a domain name. Like, you purchase a domain name of your company, or say getting a good social media handle, right? So if email was your home in web 1, social profiles like Facebook and Twitter or Instagram page was web 2, home for us on the digital front, personal property in the form of virtual real estate may be the web 3 version. Now, the reason I say maybe, a lot of things depend on the internet architectures being built and being better year on year, right? Now, the difference is, and this is very, 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 very important to understand, the difference is, instead of being beholden to providers or platforms to design, regulate, and control the experience, Web3 property is intended to be something the end user, can build yourself. For brands, it could mean something much more interactive and active rather than their current digital presences, right? For individuals, it could mean earning income by playing games or selling products, right? It's about ownership, co-creation, and interoperability. Interoperability still doesn't exist technically right now, long way to go, but the technology is too early. But we are easily at least 5 to 7 years out from mass adoption, as I mentioned, right? And then there is plenty of room of improvement. Right now, it might sound a little flabbergasting or funny, like, what, you owning digital lands? What value is that? Who'll buy it, right? So it's like I still remember the front. Not, I don't remember. I was still a kid that time. My father was a journalist, so he had a cutting of the New York Times in the early 90s, where there was a front page story which said, "What is internet? Internet is a fad. It will get over in the next few years." Facebook. What is Facebook? People are now bored of Facebook. They're coming out. So it's how things are. So that's why I talk to developers and end users a lot. So if there is, it's like a lot of users were on Facebook, it made sense. Now a lot of users are on Instagram, it made sense. A lot of users are on Telegram, it makes sense, right? A lot of users are on other platforms, it makes sense, right? Like gaming is still a very secure environment now. So the vision is still far away, but if it seems I mean, honestly, it seems, if even if it seems completely absurd, we should remember that once upon a time people had doubts on everything, the internet and the social media.
Absolutely.
But sorry, please.
No, point very well taken. I think I want to actually just kind of hold on to one thing that you brought about
Please.
just a minute back, which was interoperability, and I think that's the big kind of defining characteristic that is going to define the metaverse of the future and all our experiences, right? In fact, I started with the question, what happens to Earth 2 when somebody builds an Earth 3? And interoperability is probably the answer, right? If I could exist, if I've invested the time and effort in building an avatar of mine in a particular gaming environment, and I can take that and then operate in a constellation of other games, which assuming that they're all interoperable, I think that's powerful. But
Yeah.
how do you and Aritra, you made the point that, well, we are still far away from that, right? So how do we at this kind of elemental foundational stage ensure that we are building in interoperability by design into the metaverse as it evolves? Tanvi, would you like to take this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'll prescribe the technicality of it, but I think like when you think of interoperability in Web 2 versus Web 3, like there are some things that work or don't work, right? In each of them. So in Web 2, I mean, you have the standard space, right? Like so, like I'm in the ISO. We are working on standards even on Web 3 related things, right? But I don't know how much that's going to take off. But in Web 2, you have standards that to some degree give you interoperability, but then you have these wall gardens, right, where there isn't interoperability, like between Microsoft and their community and
Sorry, did we lose Tanvi?
we are working on solving. Hello, sorry.
Yeah, you're there.
You can hear me? Yeah, but I think I would say a couple of things in Web3 are unique and they're quite interesting. I think from the interoperability perspective, the first is just in terms of the value settlement, how you can have sort of cross-chain value settlement. Now you have all these different bridges into Ethereum, and you are able to take your assets which are on one chain and move them another place, like you were talking about the Earth project. I think another way that you're seeing the sort of interoperability in Web3 is with the single sign-on, right? Like, so if you see the way that MetaMask maybe enables this, I don't have to keep sort of switching between platforms. I can just sort of sign on with my wallet, and and I think in that sense, like DeFi has also encouraged a lot of this interoperability, right? So I think that is definitely something that seems to be working. I won't comment on the success of the interoperability chains like Polkadot and things. I think we yet to reach that like full scale adoption. I don't know if it's Cosmos or Polkadot or who takes over that. But I think if Web3 can crack two things, and this is my minimal analysis I was an engineer very long back, so forgive me. But I think if we can crack distributed servers, and if we can crack distributed computing in a good way, like not just the Filecoin and CR sort of way, but if we can really achieve that, then I think that will fundamentally change the way data will be moved, right, in the future. And I think that's where like then you're really ultimately everything centralizes today into AWS, right? So if you can change something there, I think like then the Web3 model of interoperability will have really given something new to the world, right? And so I think this is where also the debate really is, right? If you see these debates between like this Moxie Marlin Spike piece, where he was saying that no one's going to run their own servers, there will be no Web3. We already tried it with the internet, and I think really the success will come from that piece, right? So that's all I'll say on interoperability. I think there's just a lot of experimentation underway.
Okay, so I have, I think we do have a hard stop in the next 1 or 2 minutes. So I want to bring in Farah on a completely different note. But before that, Aritra, since you've had wonderful examples and analogies to offer all throughout, is there anything that you would like to say on interoperability? Because, well, ultimately this conversation started with you bringing in that. So if there's anything, just last 10 seconds on interoperability, and then I'm going to go to Farah and close the discussion.
On interoperability, no, because I think still a lot of work needs to be done. There are companies building products like between two, say, protocols, like communication layers between protocols. It's still happening. It's like how internet was developed many years ago. That nascent layer of interoperable layer is being built now between two protocols. Is it massively scalable right now? No, it still needs more work in terms of consensus mechanism that are being built. But that's the utopian world, if you ask me, from a developer perspective or from a policy perspective. Because imagine a guy playing a FIFA or somebody playing another game can take the boots of virtual Cristiano Ronaldo and give it to another person who's playing another game. Like, it's a very gaming example, but this does not exist. Like, a lot of companies, a lot of laws will come up to play to make this happen. So yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Fascinating things to come our way, I guess. Farah, I really want to close with your expertise on and thinking and work on safety, security, privacy, the kind of issues that we are still quite unprepared for as we go forward into this in this future. So my question is, what kind of guardrails you think we need to build into the metaverse by design, right, to protect against criminal activity, and how do we even enforce some of this? So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll close with your thoughts.
Well, just high level, I'll start off by saying I don't think we can depend and sort of recreate how this evolved in Web 2.0, right? Safety changes are just a little too late when the only incentive is sort of public shaming and, just doing something because you think you'll get slapped on the wrist a bit later on. So you really need to have the financial incentives that urge companies to build in safety by design and look at the risks more proactively. So whether that's the financial incentives in terms of how early stage startups are actually funded, where safety should be taken in as a component of how potentially this successful the product might be in sort of attracting and retaining users in the future. I think the whole sort of methodology around startup culture, funding culture needs to completely change. And then companies need to take into account these risks when designing their products and services and the impact to users from the get-go, right? So, Meta just announced that they're now going to bring in mandatory distances between virtual reality avatars because of, issues around groping and sort of personal boundaries. So there needs to be that's just sort of one very specific example, but that's broadly to say there needs to be industry norms around what sort of behavior is acceptable, whether it's around data collection, how virtual avatars interact with each other, all these sorts of, the list can go on, but there needs to be these industry norms and there needs to be clearly defined sort of policies of what is allowed, transparency in how those policies are executed, and then actually having users be able to report and have some sort of mechanisms for redress if we want to actually build guardrails into the metaverse.
Well, thank you very much, Farah. That was very comprehensive. Thank you, Tanvi. Thank you, Aritra. It's been a pleasure. I think we had a fantastic discussion. I could very much go on for much longer, but we'll have to call it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Anirudh.